We have testing the effects of alcohol on crickets. First, we have a question. How do substances alter living organisms' behavior and create preferences that eventually lead to addiction? Then we have hypothesis. If we give a group of 15 crickets the choice between water and a beer sugar solution, they will choose the beer sugar solution.
So here's our abstract, just to summarize really quickly. Our research paper and experiment focused on the following subtopics: neurological effects of addiction, genetics in addiction, types of addiction, mechanism behind addiction, health consequences of addiction, mental health coinciding with addiction, and withdrawal symptoms. Then here's our experiment. You can pause to read if you'd like, but the independent variable was the type of water solution, the dependent variable was the cricket behaviors, and the control variables were the duration of the experiment and the amount of crickets in each group.
So now we have specifications like materials and procedures. First, each started with 15 crickets. Cricket food was replenished as needed, but it isn't mandatory as the crickets' water double as a food source. Beer was used during the experiment, specifically Corona with 5% alcohol. Every cricket was given a new bowl solution every 3 days. The solution was 2 ounces of cricket water, 4 ounces of Corona, 1 ounce of sugar. The Corona sugar mixture was soaked in the Corona for 10 minutes. 30 minutes after the beer solution was replenished, the crickets were observed for a period of 20 minutes. Now we have week one testing. Experimental. They begin with 15 crickets. Crickets ate 2 to 5 other crickets during this week. By the end of the week, they had laid eggs and they had between 25 to 27 crickets. And on the control, they begin with 15 crickets. And by the end of the week, they had laid eggs and multiplied to about 25 crickets.
This is weeks 2 and 3 testing for experimental, April 1st through April 15th. We began week 2 with 25 to 27 crickets, and the crickets avoided the hydration pellets for a day or two and ate very little of the food for both weeks 2 and 3. Two crickets that died during that week ended up turning like a very dark, almost black color, and the other crickets didn't eat these crickets, so we assumed that was alcohol poisoning. And by the end of week 3, the population in this group was reduced to 12, and the cage smelled terrible. Also, the crickets in this group by the end of this week were a lot larger than the ones on the control side. Weeks 2 and 3 testing for control, April 1st through April 15th. Week 2 began with 25 crickets. The crickets began to eat each other, and the crickets ate almost all of the food and most of the water both weeks. And by the end of week 3, the control group was reduced to 11 crickets, and the cage was littered with droppings and dead.
So we have week four testing experimental. This week we began with 12 crickets. They were really of both hydration pellets, like they had been poisoned with alcohol poisoning. They were slightly slower, and the crickets um, stayed away from the hydration station. By the end of week four, there was only one cricket alive. He was extra large in size and seemed to be kind of aggressive in drinking only out of the alcohol-soaked pellet hydration station, and there were four uneaten bodies, and they were very dark. Now we have control. It began with 11 crickets. The crickets continued to eat each other and seemed to like the water and were not weary of the hydration station. But at the end of week four, they had been reduced to two, um, and then none of the dead crickets were of the darker color.
So here are tables. We have three tables in total. Population rate first. You can see they rise and fall pretty similarly between both groups. Eating rate and drinking rate, both of the units in these tables are percentages. So in eating rate, you can see they start off somewhat similar, and then by weeks 2 and 3, experiment drops to 35 and control stays at 95. And then week 4 is NA because we didn't end up giving them food in week 4. And drinking rate, they start off similar again, and they stay similar in weeks 2 and 3, and then in week 4, experiment drops to 35, while control stays at 85. Eating and drinking rate graphs, you can see experimental kind of drop similarly, and then control stay around that 80 to 100 range throughout all 4 weeks. And then population rates, you can see they actually drop almost identically.
So this is our analysis. Pause to read, but in the end, the crickets did not have a preference between the beer sugar mixture and the normal water.
Here's our conclusion. I'm going to give a quick summary, but you can pause to read if you'd like. In conclusion, our experiment did not support the hypothesis that after both the sugar alcohol mixture and water were placed in the experimental group's enclosure, the crickets would voluntarily choose the sugar alcohol mixture. What we mostly learned from this experiment is that data doesn't always show what you think it will, and that transparency and actually observing your experiment hour by hour are the most important things to any experiment. Ultimately, our data points to the idea that alcohol can affect every type of behavior within crickets, but can also be dangerous and even fatal in high doses. And if we were to change anything about our experiment, we would want more time to observe the crickets and place markers on each individual cricket so we could get better overall observations. And lastly, because the crickets ate each other, we weren't able to get a full death count or birth count. And here's our works cited page. Thank
Thank you.
you.